trying to second guess everything, I also asked, what are the questions that I don't know to ask that I should be asking?
And I think I did this, honestly. I think you have to keep an open mind. You have to, don't get too overwhelmed. Just take it one step at a time. I had to take it in chunks because there's so much in the beginning you have to wrap your head around that it can easily overwhelm a person and get them to throw up their hands and go, I don't know how this works. I'm just going to go back to stereo. To see it through, you really just need to say, okay, what do I need to do first? I need to pick some speakers and I need to pick a controller. Okay, step one. And then, just move through it. Step two, step three, little bitty chunks. It's like I tell my kids with homework in school, don't let the whole project or the whole homework assignment overwhelm you. Segment it into chunks and just take it one step at a time. Or another example or analogy would be, you walk into a room that's a complete disaster and you want to clean it up. Start with what makes sense first, move through that step, then go to the next step, and eventually you'll have a clean room, completed homework, or an Atmos mix, right? It's just how my brain works and how I had to step through it, because there's no doubt, if you're coming from the stereo world, there is so much to learn. It's a whole new world. And I'm grateful that 3 years now down the road, I'm actually examining broader thoughts and concepts rather than worrying about, God, how am I going to get that speaker mounted on the ceiling?
So what are the Dolby Atmos myths? Should I just be sticking a sign out now saying Dolby Atmos studio available for mixes? What should I avoid at all costs?
There was, and hopefully it's kind of gone away, but for a while, there was this idea of, I'm going to build an Atmos room because there's plenty of work, and I think very quickly it was like, where do you think all this work is coming from? Like, I was lucky because when I built my room, I had work. I had people feeding me jobs. So, the idea that, there's tons of Atmos work at there is, but I don't know where, I don't know. I'm still kind of baffled about where the money is coming from for all of this. And the other thing that's happened is a lot of the people that are like, a lot of the mixers that are mixing albums in stereo, the names we all know and love, they all have Atmos systems now. So like the idea that, I don't get a lot of work, like, hey, so-and-so mixed this record, can you do the Atmos mix? I still get some of that, but not a ton of it because they're doing it. Yeah. I've had agreements with some mixers who went like, look, I don't want to go down this road. I don't care. I don't want to spend the money. I don't want to do my room. I don't want to learn how to do it. Can I just send you stuff? So, I had a few mixers who we had a handshake agreement, like, all right, you do the stereo, I'll do the Atmos, and it worked out great. Most of those guys have now got rooms. Their assistants figured it out, stuff like that. So I would say most of the Atmos work I get is either records that I'm mixing in stereo or records I've had something to do with. Like I'm mixing a Jennifer Hudson Christmas album. But I mixed I mixed 4 songs, but I think only 2 of them made the record in stereo. But I also recorded most of the record. So I had a relationship with them going in. So when it was, and there were 5 producers and 5 different mixers and all that kind of stuff. And early on, we had discussions and they were, with the label, and they were like, no, we need to have one person do the Atmos mix and you're the guy. So, but other than that, and then catalog stuff that are records that probably were coming to me no matter what, because it's like clients of mine or clients of Al's, the Diana Kralls, the Melody Gardots, people like that, where, they they were coming to me no matter what. So, but the idea of, these these record companies have all this catalog work. That's not the case, So you kind of have to, the guys that I've seen that are successful with, you have to make up your own jobs as usual.
Both Matt and Steve are very active in the recording world, not just the mixing world. So I asked them both if they consider extra microphones for Atmos mixing at the tracking stage.
It's pretty subtle. I'm not hanging a ton of extra mics, but yeah, it's in the back of my mind usually that, there might be a few extras here and there. So, and if I know, for instance, last week I took a couple days off from Spinal Tap and I recorded a big band album that I know is going to be one of the, it was actually complicated because it's also for audio file release. So believe it or not, we did the whole thing to analog tape and to digital. With the digital is going to be used for an immersive mix and the analog will be used for a stereo mix. But yeah, I had a lot of extra mics. Because of that, I actually hung more than a few extra mics. And every time we did a solo, I had, 12 room mics, something like that. So it can add a little bit of complicated to it. Throwing an analog machine in was a huge complication. I don't suggest it. It was, I'm over the analog thing. And especially getting the two locking all the time and all that. But yeah, again, I try not to make it get in the way of the recordings. But yeah, if I can hang a couple extra mics here and there, I'm definitely doing that for sure.
Early on this stereo Atmos mixing approach, I did a record with these young men, a group called Room 219 Combo, and it's a jazz record. And we went over to a high school band room and recorded it remotely. And I purposely put mics in the positions of where my speakers are at in this room, and came back home, mixed it in Atmos and stereo, kind of refined my theories of where I wanted to take this process. And it's amazing how it really translates. And some people out there listening to this who've only been listening up to this point to Atmos mixes. The head tracking thing on the iPhone with the AirPod Pros, the AirPod Maxes, is a bit confounding to some people. Some hate it, some love it. I sent the record over to Kerry Thomas. I mentioned Kerry Thomas earlier, who used to work at Dolby, who now is head of spatial audio at Apple. Kerry got back to me and said, "Oh my gosh, the head tracking with this record is amazing." And I think he was experiencing a different thing that is compared to a pop record. And what he was experiencing was as he moves his head, he's hearing a different part of the room. So there's a continuity to the room in the headphones. Whereas in a pop mix, all done in the studio, things are isolated. So as you move your head, you're like, oh, okay, now I've got this dry guitar right in front of my face. Whereas in this jazz mix, he was hearing the space. His perspective of the space was shifting. And I'm turning in my chair to represent that. And so that really taught me a lot about the tracking process. So not only do I mix it stereo and Atmos now for everything I mix, but every time I go tracking, whether I'm going to mix it or not, I'm going to put up mics to accommodate either myself or another mixing engineer, thinking that, hey, there's some possibilities here. There's some extra spatial, environmental, ambient things we could be exploiting here. In a good drum room, why just do close mics and the room mics? We could do some side mics or some ceiling mics.
So for your stereo playback systems, do you use the same speakers as you do for your Atmos rig? or do you have a second set for stereo, or have you only got one set of speakers? How's that working?
When I check stereo, yes, I check the stereo on the PMCs, but here I also check it on IK Multimedia iLoud micro monitors. Gary Noble, who passed away, unfortunately, he was a guest on Working Class Audio. Sweet man, worked with Amy Winehouse. I saw him in an ad for IK Multimedia using these, and I texted him. He was so sweet. He would like text me throughout the year, happy 4th of July, happy birthday, like whatever it was, just real good at reaching out. And so I felt compelled, like, I'm going to text him and see if he's really using these. And so I'm like, hey, Gary, what's up with these IK Multimedia speakers? You're not really using these, are you? And he was like, oh my gosh, they're brilliant. If you buy them, get the case because you're going to want to take them with you wherever you go. So I was like, okay, all right. I bought a pair and set them up, and my jaw dropped. I was like, what is going on with these little speakers? They have some DSP in there that time aligns the tweeter and the woofer, and they've got some switches on the back to accommodate for where you're setting them up, which I had to do some fiddling about to get it to where I wanted it. But in the end, I'm going to go into an explanation here, and I might lose some people, so I'm going to step through it. The whole system, the PMC system, the Kali and PMC system, is tuned to the Dolby curve. The Dolby curve, typically if you shoot a room in stereo, you're trying to get a flat response. That's not the case in Atmos. And I'm not going to waste your time or the listener's time going into why they chose this curve, but they did. And I've become very accustomed to it. There's a little bit of a roll off in the top and a little bit of boost in the bottom. And it's a little like counterintuitive. What I learned is that in a flat system, I have a tendency to mix dark and push against the high frequency response of a mix. And what I've learned in this Atmos system that seems on the surface seems a little dark, I'm actually pushing the high end a bit, and the result, it's almost like reverse psychology. The result is my mixes translate really well because I'm actually pushing the top end a bit to get to where I think it needs to be. In case in point, I took 2 sets of mixes over to my friend Michael Romanowski's place. Michael's system that he masters to the best of my knowledge is relatively flat. He's not on the Dolby curve. So I took it over there thinking, how's this going to play out? And I played it and I was like, wow, this sounds exactly like I think it should sound. And we did I did the presentation at AES in New York. They had an Atom audio system that was only time aligned. I don't even think they tuned the room, and the mixes sounded fantastic. So I came to the conclusion that, okay, this curve, which is controversial to a lot of people, is working for me. I'm going to stick to it. However, on the IK Multimedia speakers, I'm going to set it up so those are flat. Those are just like out of the box. I'm not going to do any kind of tweaking to them whatsoever. So when I hear the stereo mix on the IKs, I'm hearing top end as it should be in a stereo mix. And it's kind of that secondary check, not only of the stereo, but of the frequency response. And I'll have clients come over and we'll listen to mixes and we'll do a little A/B comparison. Every time I put those IKs on, they're like, is the sub on still? No, it's not. And they're like, all that sound is coming out of these little speakers. And they're just stunned, just as I was stunned.
So I'm trying to do this with as little pain as possible. Who wouldn't? So I asked Steve what the possible hurdles and pinch points he thinks I'm going to hit along the way.
Most rooms that exist today were built to orient in one direction. So, the speakers are supposed to be over there and the back wall is over there, and the back wall may have absorption, and they're meant to be listened to in one direction. Well, now we have a world where, the speakers are coming at you from all kinds of directions. So sometimes the acoustic treatment is much different in rooms these days. Because again, like when I set this room up, the first thing I did after we cleared the furniture out was I set up a pair of speakers and just moved them around the room and see where it sounded best. Luckily, it sounded best the way I wanted it set up. But, for instance, if I was facing, like I'm facing now, towards the back of what we call the back of the room, that was the direction I didn't like necessarily. Well, now I still have 2 speakers there because that's where my rear speakers are. So acoustic treatment in studios is changing because now we have speakers coming from all over the place. Also, take into consideration that stuff's going to break, like it was great at Capitol. We hid all the speakers. They were behind fabric and all that kind of stuff. And anytime we had to, replace a speaker or, something, we had to take the fabric down. Sometimes it cost more to put the fabric back up than it did to actually swap out the speaker components. The other thing is if possible, and, I say this, knowing that not everybody has all the means in the world, because, it's not an inexpensive proposition. If you can have the same speakers, that's always great too. I mean, the same model is not necessary, but at least the same brand of speakers that complement each other, that helps immensely. Because as you move stuff around the room, the characteristics of the sound doesn't change that much. So that does help. And these days, there's plenty of companies that make, both affordable and unaffordable versions of Atmos systems.
So the obvious question is, what do I need to do next?
I think you have a decision to make about whether you want to use LP6s or IN5s for your side surrounds and rear surrounds. There's not a ton of content that goes through the side surrounds and rear surrounds. So there's a good argument to be made about, you can save money there. I would say for the overheads, the IN5s are probably a better choice. They are a tad smaller than the LP6. And because they're a 3-way coaxial speaker, acoustically, they're a point source, which means they're very generous spatially. They don't need to be pointed directly at you in order to work. So you've got some wiggle room with those that you don't have with a 2-way system. Our $3,000 system would be all LP series. And that is a 2-way speaker that is built to a price point. And so there are compromises that are made in terms of the materials that we're using, in terms of how much amplification power we're able to throw behind that, in terms of how much material is on the magnet, in terms of how many bits and bobs are on the magnet to keep magnetic flux down, all of these things. Those are meant to be a very inexpensive speaker. And they're very good for the price. They're very good at any price. They're a very accurate, neutral reference. But they've got more distortion than you would look at if you were spending 10 times as much money. As you go up our product line, so from the LP series to the IN series is a 3-way speaker, but it's built on much of the same platform as the LP series. So it's the same tweeter, it's the same woofer, it's the same cabinet, it's that same sort of thing of we are doing things to keep this price point low so that it's affordable for a large number of people. The IN series does really, really well in a lot of Atmos systems because of what it's able to do spatially. I said earlier, this is a point source speaker. So basically with the IN series, it's a coaxial mid-range and tweeter, and then it's a woofer that is separate of the mid-range and tweeter. By doing that, you get all the benefits that you get of a coaxial speaker, where in 360 degrees, you have phase coherence. But you get none of the drawbacks that you typically get with a coaxial speaker, where the larger transducer is acting as a waveguide for the smaller transducer, and that causes a phenomenon called intermodulation distortion, which makes voices and things like that start to sound unnatural. So the big difference between the LP series and the IN series is that you're getting a 3-way versus a 2-way. It plays a lot better in space. And by having that third transducer to handle the mid-range, it has much lower distortion overall and better mid-range clarity. So that's the difference then. With LP series, you're looking at a $3,000 system. With IN series, you're looking at a $4,500 or so system. Once you start to add subwoofers, you can get a IN series system up to about $6,000. With our new speakers, which is Project Santa Monica, which would be the $30,000 for a full system of Project Santa Monica, what you're looking at there is a speaker that takes all of those performance advantages of our IN series. So it has the three-way coaxial architecture. It plays in space as ideally as the IN series does. It has none of the compromises that make the IN series an inexpensive speaker. So we're paying more money for a better cabinet. We're paying more money for a better woofer. We're paying more money for a better amplifier. So a good way to look at that is in a $400 speaker with the IN8, we have a speaker that is already starting to compete with much more expensive speakers from more boutique manufacturers. And it's doing that because of its spatial resolution, and it's doing that because of its translation properties. If we were spending as much money to make that speaker as some of the speakers that it competes against, what would we get? That's the SM series.
Yeah, I'm really not sure I can run to a 30 grand investment. I think I'm far closer to 5 grand.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And I don't think you're making a bad decision there. What you're getting, to answer your question in a very short way, what you're getting by spending that much money is much lower distortion. And that's the sort of thing that you will notice walking into the studio. But even with the IN series, even with the LP series, honestly, there are Grammy-winning records that have won awards that were mixed in Atmos on all LP series. So there's nothing to say that, that gear is not good enough. The IN series is a darling in the Atmos community because, like I said, of the spatial resolution and how great the translation is. By spending more money, you're not going to get better translation. You're going to get lower distortion. You're going to be able to hear more details. It is going to be nicer to work on over larger periods of time. But is your end result going to be better? Hard to say. Are you going to enjoy it more? Absolutely. Is your end result going to be better? Difficult to say.
I love PMC speakers, but you know what? Cali Audio and IK Multimedia are doing some brilliant stuff. And so if your audience that's watching this is like, wow, I don't want to spend all this money. I've got to rein the budget in. Those are not bad choices at all. Those are choices that will get you to where you need to be, especially the Cali systems.
So the obvious question here really is, what do Cali need from me in order to spec up an Atmos rig?
I would spec out a system and say, you can send me, hey, I'm thinking about 3 IN8s for left, center, right, 4 LP6s for the surrounds, and 4 IN5s for the heights. What do you think about subwoofers? And we'll have a conversation about subwoofers. And that's very much based on not only the dimensions of your room, but what subwoofer do you have in there already? How is that working? Do you like it? Maybe we can work with that. Or no, I don't have a sub. What should I get? Okay. There's a lot of conversation to have about what's the right subwoofer system for you, and we'll get into all that. You've already got the interface sorted. That's great. That's about it. If your computer can handle it, you've probably got all the gear you need already, and now it's time to get building.
So some really great advice there. Thanks so much to Nate Baglios from Cali Audio for all his help, advice, and that very large pile of speakers over there that arrived the other day. 2 pallets arrived, and my wife nearly had a heart attack. More on that later. Thanks to Steve Genowick for all his help, advice before this video, and no doubt after it. And thanks to Matt Boudreau from Working Class Audio. If this is your sort of thing, do make sure you check out the Working Class Audio website and log in and sign up for Matt's 3-video course. It's well worth it. I'm probably going to go and watch it very shortly again to try and keep getting my head around all the routing and the Pro Tools stuff. The next stage is the build out. So we have some technical and physical stuff to overcome first, but that will make it into the part 2 of this series, which will be coming, I'm not going to say shortly, but it will be coming soon because these things take time. So I really hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please do like, subscribe, hit the bell, and all the normal stuff. You don't know quite how much difference it really makes. I've looked at all the analytics and boring stuff, and most people who watch my videos aren't subscribed. So please, if you're not, please do consider hitting subscribe. It really helps. But for now, my name's James Ivey from TSR, Jivey Talks Tech, and I'll see you again very soon.